Why, hello there. This is Mr. Maximus Film. Bit sick today. Um, it's painful, but I'm doing an album review for King Crimson's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King. But a couple things before I do that. I found this. I heard Pink Floyd was on the cover of Rolling Stone, so I actually bought an issue of Rolling Stone. Something I swore I would never do. But how Dark Side doomed Pink Floyd is actually kind of interesting, actually. Some interviews of the band members and stuff. It's been pretty much Pink Floyd mania around the world lately, due to the issues, which I still haven't bought anything from that. But I do plan to buy the experience version of Dark Side of the Moon shortly, once I muster up enough money after buying this, In the Court of the Crimson King. So, this is the first progressive rock album. I believe it. It's the first album that is entirely progressive. It isn't psychedelic. It isn't, it doesn't even have traces of blues. King Crimson strips the blues influence on this album, and it's all about classical music. It's all about jazz. It's all about improv, and that's why it's the first prog album, in my opinion. This album, for me, is also really frozen in time, rather than standing the test of it, because it's frozen in time because this is the only album by King Crimson that has this sort of lineup in it. After this album, they sort of fell apart. It went to number 5 in the charts. It was, their most popular album. They exploded onto the record scene, and they couldn't handle the pressure, so the lineup fizzled out. So the album, in turn, is really frozen in time. Pardon me. Very improvisational, I think. They're not as much improv as some of their later albums, but this album particularly has a lot of doodlings and ramblings that sometimes are very effective and sometimes are very musical, and other times, like in Moonchild, the illusion section, are very pointless. That 8 minutes of improv it's very warm, it's very peaceful, but at the same time it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't surge, or it just stays the same, so it doesn't have any sort of musical value whatsoever. I first got into this album about 6 months ago, but I never bought it because it's such an obscure album and it's hard to find in CD stores. I got it off of Amazon eventually. And I heard it first, 21st Century Schizoid Band. It was just so much power chords. It was such an explosion. The saxophone was wailing. It just took me by surprise that bands could do this sort of thing, and I got hooked on King Crimson. I think this is their best album, just because it's their most concrete, as their best works on it. I Talk to the Wind is my favorite song on this album, because it just, after the explosion and after all the improvisation of 21st Century Schizo Man, the flutes come in. It's just so beautiful. It's just stark beauty right there. It's really pretty. It's a really pretty song. The vocals are amazing on this album by Greg Lake. I don't think King Crimson could ever really find a vocalist as good as Greg Lake after he left, after In the Wake of Poseidon. His vocals are just so powerful and so sonorous, mellifluous, or whatever that word is. They're just fantastic vocals by Greg Lake. That's really what I like about this album compared to all the other King Crimson albums, is Greg Lake's vocals. After this album, I think King Crimson was always trying to match it. Like, they were always trying to make something as good as it, because of the lineup fizzled, and they could never really get back to the popularity that they got after this album. And I only like the 70s King Crimson. I only like the King Crimson from 1969 to about 1974. From this album to Red, I think, is their peak period when they make their best work. When they come back in the 80s, I think it gets a little cheesy, And in the 90s to 2000s, it's just too heavy for me. I can't stand it. Too heavy for me. Too much improvisational work there. But anyway, so I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the Crimsons. Um, and it's just it gets, it's a very epic album. It's a very epic album. There's not a single moment here when it's not epic, except for maybe I Talk to the Wind is a little down key, low key moment, even though it's my favorite. But 21st Century Schizoid Man, just the saxophone is wailing. It gets into the James Bond sort of section in the middle. Epitaph is this very sonorous, epic thing. The first 2 minutes of Moonchild are much like I Talk to the Wind, mellotron-driven ballad that's beautiful as well. And then in the Court of the Crimson King, the song, the Court of the Crimson King, is also sort of that epitaph, sort of epic sort of thing. This album sort of shattered the conventions of what a rock album should be. They're all long 10-minute songs. There's only 5 songs on this album. That was unheard of at this point. So it's just a groundbreaking experimental jazz fusion, just everything that prog was gonna develop into already in 1969, and that's why it was such a groundbreaking album. That's why everybody liked it. I'm going over the packaging. This is my favorite album cover of all time. I just love it. When I first saw it, it was stark. It was primal. It was just amazing. My favorite album cover. The back has the track listings. This is the 2004 remastered version. The disc is pink. The booklet is just some newspaper clippings and things of the early King Crimson. They were just really an explosion at this point. This album is just so explosive and out there. This is the actual inner sleeve with the Crimson King right there. This is the 21st Century Schizoid Man. That's the Crimson King. And the lyrics here. Really nice poetic lyrics by Peter Seinfeld. Sinfield, or however you pronounce his name. Really poetic, really dense lyrics. The only down point I think is the improv on Moonchild is really boring, but very peaceful. But it doesn't go anywhere, and it's very hard to listen to for pleasure. And in the Court of the Crimson King, the song "The Court of the Crimson King," rather, I think gets a little repetitive after a while. I'm not a huge fan of that song, but the first side of the album is absolutely gold, very good. So I would give this definitely a 8 out of 10, just because of the issues I raised. This is, though, King Crimson's best album, I think. At least of the King Crimson albums I've heard, they have not matched this. Maybe I have not heard Lark's Tons and Aspect. I've heard parts of Red, but not the entire thing. So maybe if I get into a little more King Crimson albums, I'll find something better. But this is their best work so far. This is Mr. Maxim's film. This is In the Court of the Crimson King. I will try to get a Pink Floyd review out today as well. Metal. I have some things to say about that album. So I will see you guys next time.